Eyes open.
Heads up, better than 5 o'clock high. Right? Holy shit, this is time!
Holy hell! This game's good.
3, he's on you! This guy's all over me, I can't shake him!
Face the right thing!
Ah!
There is a legend that was whispered among the jet pilots in the Korean War of a lone MiG driver who stood out among the honchos in the communist ranks. Wiping out dozens of American fighters, this red ace struck fear into the hearts of all he faced. Of course, that's the legend. But as we all know, while legends are far from truth, there's always a little grain of fact buried within them. Today we're going to look at the American Air Force's most feared opponent of Korea. Was he a man, or was he a myth? Sit back and relax, guys. It's time to talk about the fabled Casey Jones. In the fall of 1950, the Korean conflict was in full motion. The communist-backed North had nearly captured Seoul twice, but by October, UN forces had pushed the North back across the 38th parallel, the border on which the two nations were divided. B-29 bombers frequently flew into the North on bombing raids, generally unhampered by the North's piston-powered Yak-9s. The Yak-9, codenamed Frank, was a single-seat veteran of the Great Patriotic War, as the Soviets called it. While the Frank was a good fighter during the war, it was long obsolete by 1950, and they were little match to the UN's own F-82 twin Mustangs and early jets like the F-9F Panther and F-80 Shooting Star. Things began to change by November, however, as the bomber formations began to come under attack by stubby, swept-wing jets bearing the markings of the North Korean Air Force. Instead of struggling to climb up to meet the bombers, the Silver Jets were making slashing attacks with ease. They were Soviet-built MiG-15s. It was a hell of a fighter for the time. Packing 37 and 23mm guns, it was ideal for downing American bombers. The large cannons, while having a slower rate of fire than most machine guns, would devastate a fighter in one hit. Not only did the MiG feature a swept-wing pioneered by the Germans in World War II, which cut down on drag at high speeds, the fighter was powered by a copy of the British Rolls-Royce Nene engine. The modern engine, coupled with the innovative wing design, allowed the MiG-15 to outrun and outclimb any American jets in the theater. Now, the first jet versus jet dogfight did end in an American victory, as First Lieutenant Russell Brown downed a MiG-15 in his Shooting Star on November 8th. Even then, it was clear a better counter to the swift and agile MiG would be needed. The answer came in the form of my beloved, the F-86 Sabre. The F-86 was America's most modern fighter at the time and was rushed to the Korean theater in November 1950. Now, the Sabre wasn't a perfect match when pitted against the MiG-15, especially in those hard factors that are often spouted about in the armchair general community these days. So, real quick, let's compare and contrast. The MiG-15 could outclimb and outturn the F-86 thanks to its better thrust and overall lighter build. I mentioned before that the MiG had an array of autocannons which were much bigger than the F-86's 50 caliber machine guns. On paper, the MiG-15 was a better plane, until you get into the secret gadgets the F-86 had. The Sabre, first off, featured nose-wheel steering, which allowed better handling on the ground. The MiG-15 only had differential braking on each main wheel, and even then it had a limited supply of compressed air to allow braking. If you were an inexperienced pilot and wasted all your compressed air, you really couldn't even taxi to take off. The Sabre also had an all-moving tail which allowed control authority at higher speeds. The MiG lacked this, so when getting near Mach 1, supersonic compressibility made the pitch controls nearly useless. The Sabre's 650 caliber guns, while not as effective at nailing bombers, put out more lead than the MiG's cannons, making a sort of buzzsaw effect if a fighter were to fly into the hail of bullets. This increased the probability of a hit. That hail of bullets could also be made more effective by the Sabre's APG-130 radar range and gun sight. Now this is important because there were compensating gun sights going back to World War II. P-51 Mustangs and even the MiG-15 had gyro-guided gun sights. However, they only worked when the pilot dialed in the exact range that they'd be shooting at in order for the gyros to calculate lead. Adding a radar into the MiGs lightened the pilot's load. The F-86 could just point its nose at a MiG, and the gun sight would calculate the lead based on the returns of the radar waves. This allowed the American pilots to get the most out of their 50 cals and make kills at longer ranges or in harder turns. The MiG versus Sabre debate is still ongoing, but the F-86 no doubt leveled the playing field for American pilots. Thanks to the Sabre coupled with well-trained pilots, many of whom flew in World War II, the air war ended with an 8-to-1 kill ratio favoring the Sabre, depending on who you talk to, of course. Official kill ratios are hard to calculate as claimed kills don't often align with the written losses on the other side. This can be attributed to fighters being shot up in gun camera films only to limp home and land successfully. On the other side of the coin, Sabres would often pursue MiGs past the Chinese border, which was a big no-no, only to shoot them down. Of course, when this happened, these kills had to be swept under the rug or just flat out ignored. There would often be cases of gun camera films mysteriously disappearing. A notable cover-up was when Navy pilot Royce Williams nailed 4 Soviet MiGs over the Sea of Japan. I covered that here, check it out. The true kill ratio will probably never be cemented given all the gray areas in combat. Regardless, the Sabre and her experienced pilots held superiority. Most of the time. Every now and then, a damned good communist MiG driver would show up, a far cry from the ill-trained North Korean Air Force pilots. Bombers and fighters alike would fall in his wake. A common nickname for these skilled pilots was Honcho, based on the Japanese term for someone who takes charge. But who were the pilots that were so skilled? The Soviet Union's involvement in the Korean War has long been shrouded in mystery outside of the Iron Curtain. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that the Soviets were supplying the North Koreans and Red Chinese with MiG-15s and the infrastructure to support them. But what many don't know, even now, is that Soviet pilots were actually at the helm of a large number of communist Chinese Mark fighters. The Soviets, like the US, had a great number of World War II veterans with years of experience to apply, but couldn't get directly involved in the war lest they end up starting World War III. Instead, the 64th Aviation Corps was formed in October 1950 to covertly plant pilots at MiG bases in Manchuria. While they were instructed to speak either Chinese or Korean, it wasn't long before the weariness of combat forced them back into speaking their native Russian. The UN was listening in, too. In 1952, based on intercepted radio transmissions, it was estimated that 90% of MiG's traffic was Soviet flown. Even so, there was a mystique about the communist pilots. And on June 24, 1951, Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Hinton would come face to face with one hell of a pilot. Hinton had already claimed 2 MiGs and was saddling up for a third over the Yalu River that separated Korea from China. Before he could make his kill, the lieutenant colonel was distracted by an F-86 being trailed by a MiG-15. Its cannons were already firing and shooting the Silver Sabre up. Breaking off, Hinton rolled in to aid his comrade, only for the MiG to break into him head-on. 37mm rounds thumped past Hinton's Sabre by inches as the two merged. A 2-circle fight enveloped, and the 2 jet pilots fought hard in the phone booth, each jockeying for a shot. Eventually, Hinton got off a burst on the MiG driver, who wisely broke and ran rather than lose his life. He ran hard to the north, where he knew American forces couldn't pursue him. Hinton escorted the crippled F-86 home, only to find that its pilot was his friend Glenn Eagleston, a World War II ace with 18.5 kills. A MiG pilot had almost killed an American triple ace, and Hinton speculated that it had to be a Soviet pilot, given the expertise shown. To quote Hinton, "This MiG driver was good, very good. He had been waiting above the engagements between the MiGs and the F-86s. It was a well-known tactic that was commonly used by a single MiG pilot, that we referred to as Casey Jones. Old Casey was an exceptional pilot. His normal procedure was to hit fast from a high perch, diving down on any F-86 that was isolated from the ongoing air battle, quite similar to a tactic used by von Richthofen in the Great War." Casey Jones. That nickname came from an American railway legend. John Luther Casey Jones was a railroader in the 19th century who was known to sit atop train cars to spot any issues with the rails. Despite his keen eye, he was killed in 1900 during a railway crash. It's said that his quick action spared the passengers on the train, who otherwise would have been killed in the accident as his locomotive, the Cannonball, ran into broken-down cars at Vaughn Station in Mississippi. Riding high and eyeing the fighting below earned the MiG driver the moniker Jones once bore. As he rolled in, it became clear that Casey wasn't like any other exceptional MiG drivers. He was even better. An experienced pilot who tore up the skies, his name became popular among the Sabre pilots. So who the hell was Casey Jones? Well, there's no real single answer for that. Many Soviet pilots used similar tactics to those employed by the one who jumped Hinton in '51. That being said, the pilot in that engagement was later identified to be Nikolai Sutyagin, the top-scoring Soviet ace of the war. It might be easy to give him the title, however other honchos have been thought to be Casey Jones as well. Russian ace Yevgeny Papalayev with 19 victories could have been him as well. So could Zhao Baotong of China with 7 kills. Hell, we can't even discount Kim Den-taek of North Korea. What it comes down to is that there were many Casey Joneses. During dogfights where a MiG pilot would stand out or lead a flight with supreme authority, American pilots would dub him Casey Jones. One day Jones might be a Soviet ace, another day he might be Chinese or Korean. They just had to capture the mind of the Americans fighting him. And this is where the curtain falls on the legend of Old Casey. He wasn't just one man, he was an idea. A communist ace that gave the Sabre boys a run for their money on more than one occasion. A similar legend formed in the story of Colonel Toome in the Vietnam War. In an even more grim situation where the kill ratios were almost 1-to-1, a lone MiG-17 pilot would rip into Air Force and Navy formations. Colonel Toome may have been one man, he may have even been a Russian as well, but just like Casey Jones, he was more likely an idea. The idea of an enemy that could beat us. Thinking about it now, that's part of Western culture. When someone beats us or even comes close to it, we like to put a title on them. We like to think it'd be an individual who stands out among the rest, when it's often really a group of people striking from different flights or even squadrons. We like the idea of a lone ace, be them friend or foe. There's something romantic about it. Look at the Great War and the Red Baron. The Allies were the ones to make Manfred von Richthofen a celebrity almost more than Germany did. It's perpetuated through the media too. Hell, even last year, the Ghost of Kiev, the idea of a lone Ukrainian ace fighting the Russians, was all over the news. And, well, meme boards too, but what's the difference at this point? Even though he didn't exist as an individual, he was an idea, an individual identity to represent dozens of pilots. Just like Casey Jones. We're gonna call it here, I think. Again, props for Hellion for the art assets I use in pretty much every video. I also want to mention that I have a few stickers available in Hellion's online store. They're pretty cool, not that I'm biased. My lovely patrons have once again helped keep a roof over my head, which I always appreciate. A little bit of news regarding that. I've been putting on hangouts every Tuesday on my Discord for the Top Gun graduate patrons. If you want to waste a few hours with me, check out the Patreon and get signed up. We do some digital combat simulator, watch some stuff, and mainly just chill out. Oh, and one more thing before I split. You know that sun boring down on you? Make sure you keep it at your back.